Welcome, Alex. Thanks again for coming. And I'd love to hear what your synopsis view is, or the overview of the difference between the two East and West Coast investing in FinTech.
Well, first, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to the panel and having a good discussion, and maybe some questions will arise, maybe some disagreement. I would say currently, I think there's much less of a difference than sort of people might make it out to seem, and the differences are going away over time. And, I think historically what you've seen is, the Bay Area has been much more pure tech focused. It's been a little bit more shoot the moon startups, whereas New York tends to be a little bit more practical, a little bit more, economics focused. And some of that, I think, reflects sort of the risk, the familiarity with early stage risk taking that the West Coast has that hasn't quite developed on the East Coast. And some of that is a function of the ecosystem and the talent that you have in each place. So I think on the West Coast you have a lot more of that sort of hard tech talent. You have a lot of more enterprise salespeople and people who've been through that, built those organizations. East Coast has some great, obviously, finance and Wall Street talent. They also have a lot of great marketing and media, branding talent, and that's why you see a lot of some of the greatest consumer product startups start in New York, and some of the best enterprise companies start out here.
I'm fascinated. Just in the year and a bit that I've been doing these FinTech meetups, how things are growing here, the ecosystem, and I'm thrilled about that because it's one of the contributions I wanted to make. And I wonder how it is for you as an investor. Are you noticing that things are ramping up? I mean, I'm getting 10 members a day to the meetups joining, which is remarkable compared to a year ago. So I'm wondering, are you noticing a difference of things ramping up here on the side?
In terms of the FinTech?
Yeah,
and I think we've seen it be strong for us for a while now. I think it really depends, again, on the type of business. If you're talking about some of the more exchange-focused, institutional-focused Wall Street businesses or startups, I think you're going to just naturally see that more on the East Coast because of the customers. I think on the West Coast, I think we've seen, if you think about Stripe and Lending Club and Square and SoFi and many others, almost all of those are on the West Coast. You obviously have Betterment on the East Coast, which is doing quite well. But for the most part, the big finance unicorns and the big breakout successes have been on the West Coast. And I think that's going to beget more successes in the West Coast as talent leaves and starts new businesses.
Do you think investors here are putting more bets on FinTech than they were, say, a year ago?
I think it's, I think it ebbs and flows, and FinTech is a big category. So, we've seen a lot of interest in lending dry up, especially after, big market corrections for Lending Club and OnDeck, and I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. I think we still continue to see interest in insurance. I think for a lot of other software, a lot of consumer software in FinTech, I think we still see a ton of interest. What we have seen is a big influx of corporate investment. And so I think a lot of that activity and maybe even some of the froth that you might perceive in the market is really coming from some of these corporate VCs who have financial motivations, but really strategic motivations, and are taking a very different approach to funding startups.
And of course, on the East Coast, there's, particularly in New York, a lot of the big financial institutions have accelerators, whereas I think here there's only one or so. Does you think that makes a difference as well?
Probably not as much. I think Y Combinator, they do 2 batches a year with over 100 startups in each batch, and going through that list this past summer, a healthy number of them were FinTech related. So to some extent, Y Combinator dominates the accelerator landscape here. But you've got some other great startups. Obviously, 500 Startups has a whole FinTech batch, and they're fantastic. NFX has a great batch where there's a number of FinTech related companies. So I think we definitely see a ton of companies graduating from accelerators that are quite strong.
So they don't necessarily have to come from the big banks then.
No, absolutely not, yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thanks for bearing with us. I promise not to keep interviewing you, and I'm really looking forward to the panel. Thanks for contributing.
Thank you so much.